Welcome. Welcome to those of you who are popping in. Welcome, welcome. We're going to give a few, maybe 30 seconds here as people kind of continue to come in. Welcome. Getting settled in, and we'll begin in a few, maybe another 30 seconds or so as people come in. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Cecily.
Hello.
I'm great. How are you this morning?
Awesome.
Yay. Very excited. Very excited
Useful.
for our talk.
Yeah.
Love that. So welcome. It's so wonderful to be here with you all who are here, and I expect that we will continue to see people joining over the next few minutes. But welcome to SIYLI's Changemaker Forum. I feel delighted to be able to introduce Cecily Mack to you, and I will do a longer introduction in a moment, but just hello, Cecily.
Hello. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. And we are already getting folks who are writing in where they are calling from. Please feel free to write that into the chat box. We love to hear where you all are from. Where are you calling in from, Cecily?
I'm in my home in Mill Valley, California, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. Yeah. And you'll hear throughout our chat, there are a lot of birds outside today, which is kind of fantastic. So I have a little natural nature soundtrack.
That's beautiful.
I can't mute the birdies, but they're fine.
That's great. Yes. We'll take them. Wonderful. Thank you. And I'm in San Diego, California. So same time zone, but different climate. Although I think I have some birds outside my window too.
Season.
Wonderful. And we have folks, so Guatemala City, Denver, Michigan, and we may see a few more. Thank you so much for sharing that. And hello to folks viewing the live stream as well. Again, just so great to have you here and talking about this important topic. So a little bit of orientation. We have also Reggie supporting us on the back end, Regina from SIYLI, and so really grateful to her support as well. And again, thank you all for joining. Cecily and I both feel that this topic is super important for those of us who are working and parenting at the same time, and especially now more than ever in such a different era. So we are so excited to talk about this, and a couple of more logistical items. So we're going to be having a conversation, kind of interview style over the first part of our talk today. And then around maybe 20-25 minutes to the hour, we'll shift into having Q&A. And so you can feel free to chat in your questions whenever you have them. And then in the latter part of the hour, we'll be taking several questions to Cecily. And in the meantime, I get the distinct pleasure of kind of interviewing and chatting with you and hearing your perspectives on parenting. And so thank you for being here. And so just a quick introductions. My name is Lindsay Coogle. I'm the director of the Certified Teacher Community and our partnerships at SIYLI. And I've had the pleasure of being at SIYLI for almost 8 years now, and just appreciate how deeply SIYLI has allowed me to bring my whole self to work. And I will say that when Cecily Mack joined our board, she is now the chair of our board. But when she joined our board, I was one of 3 parents at SIYLI and the only parent of small children. So the other 2 parents had teenagers. And Cecily came onto the board and had this incredible host of achievements, which I will illuminate for you in just a moment, and then named that she was a mother of young children. And my heart just leapt, because it felt like, oh, here is a kindred spirit. Here is a personal hero that I can connect with and learn from in the context of our working life, and bringing our whole selves to our working environment while also being whole selves as parents.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
We need each other out there in the world.
Yes, 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 yes. And I just to share a little bit about what Cecily is up to on the professional side. So Cecily is, I can't even, when I start to talk about what you've done, I'm just like, I can't even say all of this in one go. But the highlights are, so Cecily has been an advisor and supporter of mindfulness organizations for quite a while. She is an early stage investor, and in particular, something I love, working to democratize the venture capital industry. So at the moment, she is the chief operating officer at Block Damon, a blockchain infrastructure startup. She's also a co-founding LP of How Women Invest. And she was formerly a partner with Consensus, a blockchain venture production studio, has held C-level roles in legal, revenue, and operations for Flipboard, and also Napster and Rhapsody. And my favorite part is that she describes herself as a mom, investor, and author who thrives in the overlap between tech and human betterment.
Oh, thank you.
And so that is Cecily. And without further ado, I'm so happy to introduce you and to talk about this parenting adventure we're on.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for the warm intro. It's so good to be here. And I think I shared this in one of our pre-chats, but I'm fortunate to be invited to speak in webinars and to groups and do coaching and mentoring all the time. But when I received this note from Search Inside Yourself, that there was an invitation for me to speak with you and on this topic with guests, it was hands down, without question, my favorite invitation in ages, just because this is a topic that's so heartfelt to me. And I don't feel like we talk about it enough. We have a lot of conversation about women balancing career and home life and the challenges of parenting and maintaining all the other obligations and responsibilities we have. And there's been some wonderful discourse about working from home with children and some of the comical and equally difficult challenges that go with that, but not a lot about on this particular topic. And it's one that's so near and dear to my heart. So thank you for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here, and it's fun to see all these folks coming in from all around the world too. So hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm curious, we've been talking about parenting in our context as the most important job. And so when you think about that in balancing this extremely influential and I would say high-powered career that you have, how do you kind of hold those two things as you think about the most important job and then all of these demands that you have and also demands that come from your heart, right? The work that you do comes from your heart around, right, democratizing the venture capitalist industry, right? So how do you balance those two things?
Well, I mean, there are kind of two things in there, which is one, how did mom become my most important job? And then just the actual practicalities of maintaining a vigorous career and also feeling like a present parent. And to be honest, I had a bit of a wake-up call of my own a few years ago. I wasn't always exceptional at prioritizing my role as mom, which is maybe one reason why it's so important to me now. In fact, I think of the term executive mom a lot when I think about executive females who are also parents. And I was just reflecting on this a little bit this morning. The ordering is wrong there. It's actually mom executive. And I think I self-oriented and self-identified as an executive mom, like somebody who had this really dynamic career and, wonderful recognition and accolades and kind of a lot of externally generated value and self-worth for so many years. And it was honestly only about 3 or 4 years ago when I had a little bit of a wake-up call, and thank goodness I did. My sons were then, I think, 5 or 6 and 9, 10-ish. So still pretty young, grade school. And I had just been emerging from a really challenging time of my life with a couple of moves and the beginning of a divorce and job change and things were difficult. And I had a moment when I had been really rethinking some of my life priorities and where I was going to land and what kind of a schedule I wanted to have and exactly where I wanted to live in this emergent chapter. And I had a real instant shock of, oh, wow, the kids. And I realized in that instant that I had been letting my role as parent run a bit on autopilot. They were doing just fine. School was fine. Their grades are okay. They had good friends. They're healthy. We're really fortunate in that way. But I wasn't really tuned into how they were doing. I'd been so wrapped up in my own conversation, my own story, my own shifts that I didn't really stick with them in a present, conscious, mindful way through that first year of transition. I was just trying to get through it. And so I think particularly from that moment forward, I just moved that role of mom and mothering and parenting and being present for them in a calm and conscious and deliberate way up on my priority list. And that meant a lot of micro changes, honestly, little things like making sure my calendar was open between 2:50 and 3:30 every day. So working from home, I could walk down to the elementary school and receive my son and give him my full attention, kind of helping him make his transition home and into his next activity or whatever it was. Or things like just making sure if I needed to do something in the morning before they went to school, waking up an hour early. So when I did have my 90 minutes with them and helping to prepare and feed them and get them dressed, they would have my full attention. And those little micro changes just over time have helped me reaffirm that first responsibility. And I've been reminded of it too in fun and interesting and unexpected ways over the years. Some I paid attention to, some less so until later. But one example is I had a good friend who had just sent her oldest son off to college last fall. And I bumped into her in the street by my home, and she was just weeping with remorse and sadness that this bedroom in their home was now indefinitely empty. And what she said to me was, I just hope I taught him everything I need to teach him before he went out into the world. Did I give him everything I could give him? And it made me aware of the scarcity of time we have. So that's been a real affirmation as well. We don't have that long with our children in our home, in our nest. And I'm just thoughtful myself about not wasting that time and trying to be the best version of myself while I'm with them. And, the second part of your question about balancing it, it's really, again, kind of those micro decisions, the daily efforts. It doesn't mean that I never work in front of my kids or I never take a phone call or I'm some immaculate, perfect parent by any stretch of the imagination, but they do know that they're a priority, and I will often make decisions and prioritize time and my energy to make sure that I'm as present with them as I can be. You might recall the first or maybe the second SIYLI board meeting I attended. It was actually on my son's 8th birthday. Just by coincidence, it had been scheduled before I joined, and I had planned a breakfast for dinner and poker night for our family that night, and I wanted to be home by a certain hour. And I remember greeting the board for the first time and kind of walking my talk, and I told everybody that I was going to be leaving the first board meeting an hour early so that I could be home for breakfast for dinner, family birthday gathering for my son. And it's little things like that that just have a really big impact over time. And the board could see it. And my son knew that I had made that shift, and it just kind of paves the way for how we set our time, which is limited.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. And I appreciate the the micro changes, right? Because it is these habits that we build up over time that sway us in one direction or the other. One example that you shared when we had our prep conversation for this, which I hope you don't mind sharing because it really landed for me because I had literally just done it the night before, was you said you remembered during a period of, sort of pre the, oh wow, the kids moment, kind of like skipping pages in bedtime stories so that you
Mhm.
could get through it faster and get them to bed. And you said that to me and I was like, oh gosh. And so to me, it's such these micro things are so they are the things, right? They're so big, actually. They're small in the moment, but I love your perspective on making those choices and how
Mhm.
that, what is the effect when you make those choices in the moment? How does it affect you? Do you see it making a difference for the kids in the moment? And what is it like for you in the moment as well?
That's a beautiful question. Um, I think, I mean, our whole lives, parenting aside, even how we meet our day, our hours, the people we interact with, what we spend our money on, what invitation we accept. These are all a billion micro life decisions that we make. And I think of every waking hour as a series of micro forks in the road. And it's much like, we're navigating across a sea of life, right? We might have an idea of our destination and where we want to be at the end of this arc of time. But in the early stages, even just a 1 degree off move can navigate us to a completely different destination than where we thought we were going. So when I think about all those micro decisions, I try to envision a few things with my kids. How do I want them to experience me, not only as mom, but as a woman and as an adult and as a role model? And they're at this age, as children arrive much more quickly than I think we give them credit, where they're watching what we do much more than listening to the words we say. We can kind of get away with verbal parenting in the beginning. Those first few years, we're explaining why we use manners. We're teaching them to not do things that could cause them harm. And, just kind of the basics. There's a lot of talk and language parenting, but pretty early on in the grade school years, they're actually watching us far more than they're listening to us. And I reflect myself on my own experience as a child of my own parents. And I barely remember things that they said to me in trying to parent me. Of course, they're the memorable conversations and they're the certain lessons that were repeated over and over through life. But we remember more how they made us feel and how they behaved in a world that we were entering as we matured. And we take conscious or unconscious notes that that's the way to do it. They're modeling that for us. And so I think I view the time that I do have with my kids, which is actually quite scarce, even, coming out of now this sheltering in place, as they're re-engaging with activities and, school and whatever, it's how many hours a week? It's actually not that much time that we have direct connected engagement with our children, or even doing something like getting them into an orthodontist appointment. And they're watching how we engage. And so when I think about those micro decisions, I'm trying to come to a place where they're less conscious and just more natural. Of course, we can read a second story, um, you don't feel well today and you feel like you need a day at home, and being tuned in enough with my child that knowing they actually don't have a fever, they don't really have a sore throat, there's no major red flag of a physical symptom that would indicate I should keep them at home, but something inside of them is saying, I need a home day today, or I need a mental health reset just to kind of take the foot off the gas of all this activity today. And they have seen me do this. And so the least I can do is listen to them in that moment and not force them out the door, because I want them as adults to be able to hear that in themselves. And so if I'm modeling that for them in these little ways, and then how we use that day, this has happened in the last year, let's not sit on our butts all day long and, look at iPads or Netflix or whatever it is. If we're going to take care of us day, let's cook something together. Let's maybe think about something we could do in our little micro garden. Let's, do something creative and something generous. And, we're not perfect at this. There definitely are iPad and Netflix moments too, but it makes me more aware of modeling that stuff. And I'll never know if my kids noticed some of those things we talked about. Like, but I was definitely a repeat offender on the skipping the pages in the bedtime story. And I have some shame about that. I'm not proud of it. They'll read about it in what I've written on this topic someday. And I may have joked about it with my teenager over the last year or so. But, the other side of that coin is also not beating ourselves up or being ashamed of our less than awesome moments, because parenting is not only the most important role, but it's also really hard. And we're going to make mistakes and we're going to do horrible, regrettable things. And part of it is just also kind of owning that and not beating ourselves up and moving on. And that itself is also modeling the behavior for the kids. Hey, kiddo, that was pretty embarrassing that I just lost my temper with the gas station attendant about something completely irrelevant. And that was not the right way to do it. And when we go back next week, we'll, bring him something from the garden and say, sorry and thank you, or whatever it might be. So it's kind of those little micro things. And they're such great teachers, right? I don't know about you, but my kids call me out all the time. I also love hearing back from them things I've tried to teach them. I had one with my teenager a couple of weeks ago where he was telling me about something that he wanted to do or change with one of his relationships. And it was a right kind of boundary to set for him. And I encouraged him to do it, even though he was worried about how this might hurt the other person's feelings. And we had a conversation about how important it is to honor ourselves and our own values and preferences in a graceful way, in a thoughtful, kind, mindful way, even if it might not be the best case scenario or outcome for the person we're engaging with. And then a week later, I was having a struggle about something very similar. And my teenager said to me, Mom, how other people feel about the choices you make for yourself is not your responsibility. I thought, oh man, I'm creating my own monster here. So it was just a reminder. We just have to be super watchful about that kind of stuff.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that. Well, I mean, one of the things that I love that you named, not to beat ourselves up, because, just like you said, there's not a single parent. I would say there's probably not even a single week that goes by that, we don't make some mistake that we regret. So yeah. What does the inner work look like? What does it look like for you to be able to meet that consciously for yourself, right? In order to, I'm thinking about myself. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to model this, I have to really feel this way, right? Because kids will pick up if you're just faking it, And so what does that look like for you? How do you care for yourself? How do you do that inner work so you really can feel it and model it in an authentic way?
Yeah. I mean, I have a kind of a simple answer for this one. There's probably a series of layers beneath it, but for me, the biggest thing has been finding ways to live a life that allows me to be very calm, honestly. So if I am a non-volatile emotional being and I have the ability to meet difficulty with a certain level-headedness and lack of reactivity, it seems to make everything a little bit easier. And that's at work, and that's at home, and that's at bedtimes, and that's in traffic, and wherever we are in the world. And so, and everybody has their own self-care routine that they can adhere to keep that level of calm or groundedness or peacefulness. I have a pretty simple formula in my life. I need a little bit of time in the morning when I awaken. That's just me. It's not a sitting practice, but it's a gratitude practice and it's an awareness practice. And most days I can start with just at least 5, 10, sometimes 15 or 20 minutes of just awareness of how I'm entering a day. It's also really critical to me that I exercise, and I try to find time to run, even if it's just a couple miles, 3-4 days a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. But I've found that physical activity and being in nature, if I can combine them in a local run or something, that is hugely and deeply nurturing to my ability to stay calm and present. And then also just being thoughtful about what we let into our day-to-day lives. I mean, if there are people or activities that are agitating, try to minimize those. It doesn't mean that you never engage with certain people that we need to engage with, but maybe we find ways to keep it light and keep it surface and keep it public, in a public space, and kind of contain our own boundaries to the best of our abilities, so that what we're letting in is supportive of the way we're trying to be. And it's funny, my kids actually call me out on this a lot. they are the most consistent source of encouragement for my running, for example. We had a couple of months in the pandemic, I would say probably in the winter, like the December to February timeframe in this last year, when it was just tough. We were doing Zoom school. It had been almost a year. I was working from home. It was cold. We had, a bunch of just logistical challenges. And we would get to 3 p.m, and I would have all this motherly guilt and shame that I hadn't gotten the kids out of the house that day. And there wasn't a lot that we could do. And I would kind of emerge from my day of work on Zooms and say, okay, guys, we have to go somewhere. We have to do something. We have to get out of the house. I feel like I'm a bad mother if I'm not getting us to do something so we can get our yayas out and, be okay for the rest of the night. And a couple of times they looked at me and they just said, Mom, why don't you go for a run? What are you talking about? I'm trying to get us out of the house. They said, Mom, we're fine. We're, going to do this thing and, whatever, like, this is you're talking about. And I embraced their calling me out on that. And more than a couple of times, I unusually took a run in the middle of the afternoon in 45-degree weather and just pulled myself back together. And I think it's really important for us all to think about what it is that nurtures us. And it's not those things for everybody. And it may not be calm for everybody, but in my case, it's, having a couple patterns of practice and things to do for well-being, rest, restoration. For many people I know, it's journaling. For many people I know, it's making sure that they get 30 minutes on the phone with their mom at least every other day. It's cleaning. I mean, I get such joyfulness out of taking care of our home, which I know makes me kind of an oddball, but whatever those things are, if we can kind of clear our own energy and meet our moments of challenge with a lack of reactivity so that we can stay present and kind and deliberate in the way we communicate with the people that we love, that has a ripple effect around us. We've all been in a household where one person gets in a bad mood, and then before you know it, the whole household's in a bad mood. Well, the other works that way too. If everybody's a little bit blah and one person emerges kind of sparkly and energized and wants to turn on some good music and propose making a funny dinner, it has the power to transform the energy of the whole household. So whatever we can do to be ready to be on that upswing, I think is healthy.
Thank you for that. I love hearing about that. And I like one of the things I'm really hearing throughout this whole piece, which is sort of obvious, but is landing for me, is the intentionality behind it, right? You have these intentions to be let's say calm or non-reactive or engaged in a kind way that's authentic, and just holding that intention as a kind of a consistent element of your psyche is offering those choices, and then you can kind of consciously choose them. So I'm just really homing in on that as a way of being.
There's a fun loop that I wouldn't mind kind of making me think of as well, which is that intentionality at its best comes from a clear sense of what's important to us. So it's much easier to define where you're going to invest most of your energy and time with intentionality when you are really crisp on why and what's most important. And I think that's an important kind of pre-step in getting to living with intentionality, is figuring out what our priorities are. And then even an important pre-step before that is being tuned in enough to know with a certain level of confidence what our priorities are. So, and that comes back to the full loop of really listening to yourself. Do we create the space for enough calmness and quiet where we can hear our inner voice? We can experience in our body when we have affinity or attraction or hesitation and, repulsion. And that's really important. That's actually part of the big work for me, is often not just shutting down, not shutting down, the intuitive sense, and not just getting into this like do, crazy, go, engage, list making mode of life. But this third really important arena of just being tuned in enough and creating the space to be quiet and witness yourself. What made this day a great day? Why was sitting on this freezing cold bleacher with my kid for 3 hours through the other one's baseball game delightful? What was it about that made that good? What was it about coming out of that dinner with 3 former colleagues that makes me feel really uncomfortable? Like I just spent energy in a way that wasn't mutually nourishing, and it felt misaligned. So when we start paying attention to that stuff, then we can be really clear about, okay, where are my priorities? What actually does matter to me today? And once those get clear, which was a bit of my wake-up call a few years ago, is putting my role as a parent, a caregiver, and a nurturer as the base kind of core foundational building block of everything else, it actually makes everything a lot easier because you have a lot less decisions every day. I mean, I very regularly, multiple times a day, have a parent responsibility, or, Cecily, take care of self responsibility, or Cecily, take care of a work responsibility. And most of the time they're instantaneous decisions. I don't need to think that much about it. I know where the compass is. I trust it. I've listened to it. And so I can make sometimes controversial decisions, but I feel so certain about the fact that they're right for my family and for me that it takes a lot of the emotional agita and angst out of the hour by hour. So it's a very interesting, I don't know. I love that loop. It's very interdependent, I guess, is a good way of putting it.
Yeah. And I just, appreciating that reminder to okay, what really is important to me, and have that be a central, central question that we bring in with some consciousness.
And it might be something not popular, frankly. I mean, and that's totally fine. For some people, things that are really important to them are not trendy or socially acceptable. I think women struggle with this a little bit. It's important for some of us to feel self-care and feel like we're nurturing our own femininity or physical being as well. For some women, that means making sure your nails are done every 3 weeks, and you get the facial every 2 months, and you have your regular Pilates on Zoom you do a couple times a week or whatever it is. And none of us should judge anybody for what those things are. If that's part of what helps you feel calm and confident, and I went through many years where those were things that made me feel calm and confident. Like if I was going to go into an intimidating Silicon Valley board meeting, it wasn't that I had put my children to bed in this, thoughtful, loving way, which is much more important to me now. Then it was like, am I wearing the right outfit? Do I look awesome? Do I feel, strong enough to manage the 14 men in this room who are otherwise extremely intimidating in this, soul woman executive capacity? And that's what worked for me then. And that's okay. That's okay. So it's also just kind of like going with whatever works for you. And knowing that might change a lot throughout life as our priorities and our roles and our responsibilities shift, particularly with aging parents or emerging children, or going off to college, or trying to work from home through a pandemic. I mean, it's like we also have to stay a little bit nimble and just kind to ourselves in the process.
Yeah, that's huge. Well, I feel so we have some questions coming in. There's one other piece that I did want to get to. So thank you for putting in the questions, and we'll start to talk through them in a couple more minutes. I did want to just ask you a little bit about, the way that you see interacting at work. And, we've talked a lot about what this looks like in the interface with the kids. And I wonder what it looks like for you in the interface with work. Yes. So curious about this.
So this is also kind of an area that has shifted for me over the years. So, wherever you are in the world on this journey, be kind to yourself and don't feel like you need to live up to any one way or another of doing this. For many, many years, the first probably decade of my role as a mother, maybe a little bit less, I kind of kept my role as mother behind the curtain when I was at work. So I wanted to minimize the visibility of my obligations as a mother. I wanted to assure my colleagues and employers that I was not compromised by my role as a mother, and that I had great support at home and great childcare, and I had it together. This thing of children was not going to interfere with my ability to be amazing at work, right? And that served me for a while. I mean, honestly, I was able to navigate through some fascinating roles and steps in my career because I was really present and I showed up fully at work. And honestly, at times, in a way I wouldn't do now, I prioritized business travel and certain meetings and hours in the office over really important things that I could have been attending and been present for with my kids. And at a certain point that shifted. And it was a combination of a few things. I got to a place of, I think, maturity and confidence in my career where I know what's important to me now. And if, because I stop work at 4 p.m. on Tuesday every week so I can be at the baseball game, a boss wants to fire me, okay, so be it. I mean, if I had to choose between the two, I would go through the extra cycles of making sure I found an employer or team to join, or a company or fund to create with people who were supportive of these really other important components of my life, because those just aren't sacrifices I'm willing to make anymore. But it took some time. And now in my day-to-day, I see it not only as a way to adhere to my own priorities and living my own life, but I feel this incredible responsibility to be an example to coworkers as well. In fact, I've swung the pendulum in the other direction, and I'm quite vocal and explicit about my prioritization of my role as a parent. And instead of getting into Slack and saying, I'm going to be signing off early today, doctor's appointment, or headed to a meeting, or some other kind of non-truth that would be more professional workplace acceptable, I will actually be pretty vocal about it. Hey, everybody, something really important is going on with my kid today. I'm going to go give him my full attention. If it's urgent, text me later tonight. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow. And I've had people with whom I've worked come to me and thank me for showing that that is an option, that they too have permission to prioritize their family responsibilities. And it might be a parent or a partner or even a pet. It doesn't necessarily have to be a mom to child role. We have deeply valuable connections and relationships throughout our lives that, frankly, I don't think should be neglected because of our professional responsibilities. And the more that we can show the teams that we're building and working with that it's okay to leave a professional or a work commitment when we have the flexibility and the ability to do so, to tend to something in our connections, in our relationships. Not only is that good for our immediate family or community or who we're loving in the way that we feel we want to love them, but it gives others around us permission to do the same. And that's one of the most meaningful components of work for me now as a parent, is really helping to nurture a safe place for people to live on their priorities and lead by example. And that board meeting, the SIYLI board meeting, was a great example. I was a little nervous about it because it was my first, it was actually a board retreat. And I felt badly that I was missing an important closing hour or so, but at the same time, it felt very affirmative of the SIYLI values. And I felt wildly and beautifully supported by the fellow board members and Rich as the CEO. There was not a thread of judgment or negativity around that decision. And it made me feel even more intentional and present when I came home to be with my family and told my father in his 70s, who grew up in an era where none of those things would happen, right? Hey, you know, I left the board retreat an hour early to be here to eat scrambled eggs and play poker in honor of your 8-year-old grandchild. You know, like that's the good, amazing stuff of life. So I'm just continuing to try to lead by that example. And in our company today, we have a number of parents of young kids and babies being born. And I am an influential person as the COO, and I will publicly encourage them to take time off. Don't cut leaves short. You don't get a second chance.
I love that. Thank you so much. And we're getting a lot of questions. So I'm going to kind of move into that realm and just love right, as we, whatever kind of role we're in, we do what we can do also to create that influence around us. So loving that. And then on a related note, one participant writes in, I hear a lot of examples from mothers in leadership positions. What advice do you have for moms who are not in leadership positions and might not have the decision-making power to leave work early or have as much of a flexible schedule? Mm-hmm. What advice would you have around spending time with kids, or how to navigate that in that kind of situation?
First of all, I just would acknowledge it's difficult. It's hard. And it's not just for mothers, it's also applying to fathers. And again, anyone who has a personal interest or commitment out of work that they want to nurture. I've been reminded over the years that, sometimes parents seem like they have this special treatment because the children factor. And what if you're a 45-year-old woman who doesn't have children, but you're really passionate about your road biking practice and you want to take afternoons off for a quarter to prepare for a big race? I mean, it's actually quite similar. And I don't want to prioritize one or the other. When we're not in a leadership role and we can't play by self-created or co-created rules, I think probably one of the most valuable things you can do is speak to the people in your circle with whom you work about what you would like to achieve or what flexibility is important to you. And see if just by an open communication and kind of co-awareness around some shifts you want to make, even if it's a small 10% shift in your schedule or a slight accommodation, it can make a really big difference. I've had many circumstances in my career where a junior person to me or somebody on a team, whether it's my team or someone else's team, has come to me clearly very nervous and full of preparation to ask for some slight break in their schedule for a personal reason. And it might be that they need a couple of weeks or 4 weeks off, or they want to accept an opportunity to coach the girls' soccer team. And that would mean, for the next 3 months, leaving the office at 2:30. I have never seen an example where a request like that was met with a no. Most of the time, if not all of the time, there are ways to accommodate certain preferences, particularly if the person coming with the inquiry or the request for support, it comes prepared and has kind of thought through ways to support the interest of the team or the organization or the school or whatever it might be in a way that could be workable. So I think I would just encourage those in that position to not wait too long and realize you probably won't be penalized or fired for having the conversation. In fact, it's generally almost always better to find the right time and place and just sit down and explore whether or not there are little micro adjustments that can be made. And I found in those earlier years, also when my kids were really little, and I struggled with this a bit, little things made a big difference. You know, I figured out a way early on to telecommute just one day a week. And that one day a week meant that, you know, I was able to kind of land a sports practice onto that day and then really just be thoughtful about what I did in that morning, which was different than the mornings I was commuting. And it was not a lot of difference, but it was enough to be memorable for everybody who was impacted by it. So I don't know, communicate and start small, and don't not try something because it seems intimidating or scary. If you're coming from the right place, you might be surprised.
Thank you. Thank you. And there's a few more, which this is of course related. Yeah, it's sort of a question around society and the world we live in. So the question is, how can we defend our parenting priorities while navigating a world that is still so success 24/7, productivity oriented, right? So even beyond the workplace, right? How can we approach that interaction with again a society that's so productivity oriented? I would say especially in North America. There's, I mean, certainly there, but I think a lot of places around the world it's like that, super driven, or also Asia, like there's such a drive in that regard. So what's your perspective on navigating that?
I mean, that's a fantastic question. I think, first of all, accepting that as we change our behavior in any way, not everybody's going to like it. It's impossible to make shifts and expect the whole world to be on the bus with us, or even our entire team or company or organization or community, whatever that is. So I think a first step is just accepting that there's going to be some challenge and difficulty in making any shift and change. Second, I would add, I think we are actually in a fairly notable transformative era. And this last year and a half, and everything it has been for so many people, has put a spotlight on things that were maybe overdue. And it is an interesting window of opportunity to emerge with some shifts. You know, whenever we're trying to make a big change in life, it's great. It's easy to kind of bundle changes, right? So you hear about people talking quitting smoking. Like when you move homes, it's pretty easy to make a habitual change because you've changed your environment. In this case, many of us are reemerging into more regular work schedules or school schedules or routines of sports and other activities. And I really, as scary and intimidating as it is, I think I want to go back to that ripple effect. We're all actually leading a bit by example. And if we can just make certain shifts and be explicit about why we're making them, even those little actions, we might find out years later, impacted other people to make those little actions. And before you know it, you have a whole body of humans that have shifted their behavior because one influenced and inspired one, and the other one saw it was okay, so they did the same. And then it kind of moves around that way. I've certainly seen a lot of this in my own life, and also in bigger organizations undergoing transformation. So I don't think we're going to see big dramatic change. You know, we're not going to snap our fingers and see a more heartfelt or conscious country or even world. But if we can, a few of us gradually shift in the right direction, there is really something to be said about the growth in masses of people that are treating this more differently. And we've seen a lot of this even in the last 5 or 10 years. I mean, I've been a woman working in tech companies in Silicon Valley, and thank goodness for some of the bold, fearless people who've stepped forward, men and women, and said, enough is enough. You know, I have sacrificed this much for this career, and from this moment forward, here's the change. I'm going to be, behaving in a different way. I'm going to not put in 16 hours in the office anymore. I'm going to prioritize my health after having a heart attack at 35. Sometimes, we have these wake-up calls, and I do see enormous change, and I see a lot of it trending in the right direction, and mindfulness and care for families and loved ones and our own well-being. And we can each do a little bit of our part to keep moving in that right direction. They don't have to be huge transformative things, but just small micro changes that can then influence folks around us. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's really, for me, calling up this question around industry. I have a good friend who works in the movie industry. She works in Hollywood, and it's like, the expectation is a certain number of hours. And of course, in the pandemic, things have shifted in terms of where those hours are completed, but there's still this like go, really, production oriented. And so what's coming up for me is this sense of like, wherever we are, right, we can aspire to a particular way it might look, but wherever we are, we can take one step in the direction that we want to go, as opposed to having some particular goal of like, okay, great, everybody can take an afternoon off, or whatever it is, but having, knowing the direction you want to go, and then taking one step and having that be an approach.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Hollywood space. I have a family member who's a producer in LA, and he's had to move his studio into their garage
Totally.
from their very fancy office arrangements. And he's got a couple teenagers at home too. And he was sharing with me last time we spoke that he's had to kind of train the people around him to adapt. And he's been in his role for 20 years, so he has a fair amount of earned credibility. But you don't need to clock in at 7 a.m. and clock out at 5 p.m. to achieve the output of his role, right? They do kind of track hours there. He was able to, through some pretty courageous communication, explain that because there's a commuting, because there isn't, talking in the kitchen in between breaks, because there isn't the 90-minute lunch, the kind of hobnobbing in the hallway, that in fact he's doing more in 6 or 7 hours than he was in his full expansive day. And he was able to demonstrate and show that, and actually resulted in a change in the way that the organization is tracking productivity. But he had to speak up, and he's not some big senior guy. He's a respected producer, but he is kind of one of many in a massive organization, and was able to effectuate some change, which not only impacted his life and that of his daughter and that of his son, but then the 4 people who work on his same team and the 6 that work in the neighboring building. And all of a sudden, everybody's looking at time a little bit differently. And that's transformative. That's one conversation that changed a multi-million-dollar organization's way of working, and all of their families who are all figuring out how to work from garages and golf less. I mean, it's kind of cool.
Love that. Let's see. I think we have a little bit of time for maybe one more question, and I'll go to a question sort of related and quite practical. So I'll just read it, and we can talk through it. I think there's a powerful connection I think there's a powerful connection and interworking between developing mindfulness and awareness and setting and honoring boundaries. So and we've talked about this throughout the hour, but wondering if you want to comment a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, it kind of comes back to this notion of knowing where your priorities are, letting those inform your intentions and how you spend your time, and then informing intentions and how we spend time. We develop boundaries to protect what we have decided. So I think there's boundaries it's an interesting word. I think for some people, it can invoke this notion of a wall, like an obstacle, a go away visioning. I think of boundaries more from on the inside, which are, this is the space that I'm holding, and this is the rim of the space. And the rim of that space allows for this container that I can then fill with what I've chosen because of such set boundaries. And it's not a exclusion or a fend off or a negative armor or wall. It's more of a gentle basket, like a formation of a container. And it's really through our own self-awareness around what we want to fill our own containers with that helps us define what those boundaries are. And we've talked a lot about time here. That's a very kind of easy two-dimensional tactical way to think about our boundaries. We all have our digital calendars now. It's a wonderful tool to just place some awareness around our boundaries. I've worked with a very powerful founder recently who, like me, he has a couple of blocks on his calendar that are pretty regular during the week where it's just not available. And I don't know what he does in that time, and it's none of my business. I know he has children and a wife and family, and I like to think that that's just him saying, this afternoon, this day of the week, every week, I don't do meetings because I'm doing something else that's nurturing to me, that lives within the boundaries that I'm setting to be the container of what's important to me in my life. I certainly do that when I have my children. I have a 90-minute block every morning that is non-negotiable. There is no, can we just get the call in with the investor at 8:30? I know it's one of your kid mornings, whatever. And the answer is, I'm so sorry, but I don't take meetings in those windows. And that's my kind of gentle, I'm holding the space so that I'm not doing this while my children are asking me for help in preparing for school. And that's really nurturing over time. So I think of boundaries as like a very positive reflection of our awareness, a positive manifestation of where we are setting our own intentions and priorities with what's the most important to us. And we do not want to wake up, later in life and lament not adhering to our own priorities or feeling like we didn't create the boundaries that we needed to spend our time and our energy on the things that mattered the most to us. So it's just a little co-creation there too.
I love that. Seeing the boundaries as because I'm guilty of the sort of like, ooh, boundaries feel exclusionary to me, and that kind of thing, and seeing them as a kind of a sweet basket. I like that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I want to be conscious of time, and thank you so much, Cecily. It is so fun to talk about this, and I know that you and I could go on and on about it.
That's
and
good.
Totally love it. But I just want to say thank you, and how much fun it is to hear about how you look at this most important job. And I want to also offer much gratitude to everyone here. Thank you so much for being here. And in our last minute, want to offer, Reggie is going to share a quick little bit of information. By virtue of attending this Changemaker Forum, you are eligible for discounts on our programming, on SIYLI's programming. So I'll move my chat so I can see you using the discount code ALUM on most of our events on the Eventbrite pages when you register. So just knowing that for Search Inside Yourself, Effective Teaming and Adaptive Resilience, that code is available to you. And then Pause and Practice is something that you can join. The next one is June 10th. We do them on a monthly basis, and that's just a free half hour of practice together where we do some reflection and either journaling or dyads. So wanted to share that and all the ways to stay connected with SIYLI. And again, just appreciating SIYLI's board chair and mom and investor and all the wonderful things that Cecily holds. Thank you again so much for being a part of it today.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. And Lindsay, it's always such a delight to journey with you. So thank you for sharing the time.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day or night, everyone. Thank you again for being here.
Yeah. Bye.